Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Fundraising Insider podcast, the podcast where we study what's hiding behind the check and we put it inside the deck. Today, we're going to do a lot more than this because we have a very special guest. Addy, thank you for joining us. We met something like 4, maybe even 5 years ago at an Octopus VC event, and I was still a naive young founder, and I'm just a bit less naive and not really a founder anymore. But we have many, many interesting things to talk about. You're going to tell me everything about Regenerate Asset Management. Usually, I let the guest introduce the name of the company, but here it's taken an angle that's very interesting. You're going to tell us because there were changes, you changed your role. There's a new development with not only VC, but today I'm really glad we can tackle PE as well. So
Yeah.
we're growing in our outreach, but also growing in the themes we tackle. So please, Addy, tell us who you are, how you came to do what you're doing today, and where you work, what's your role, everything.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, it's great to reconnect on this podcast. Background on me, so hi, I'm Addy Windsor-Clive. My background's in ventures and basically early stage sort of innovation. I started my career in this 14 years ago in sort of a corporate finance boutique firm, helping companies on their decks and sort of raise capital, getting them investment ready before joining a VC fund that was focused on commercializing IP from global university networks at sort of pre-seed proof of concept, and that was very much in pharmaceuticals, life sciences. AI, first iteration of AI looks very different to AI now. And so I was there for 5 years in the investment team, did a bit of fundraising there. I then left that to go and launch my own business, which was a grab and go food, Vietnamese rice paper roll business in London. We had a couple of pop-up locations throughout London, and also was in a dark kitchen for one of the major food delivery services that I'm not sure how I'm allowed to name, but you can probably guess which one it is. So that was a real experience from being at sort of being on the investment team for early stage companies and then doing it myself and running a team of 30, working in the kitchen, as well as doing the HR and admin and also trying to do business development and drive it forward. So that was a real learning curve for me, and gives me a lot more humility and understanding for founders themselves, having been through it. I then left that business after a few years because it wasn't scaling in the right way that I wanted it to. I then wanted to get back into VC, but marry up sort of my love of the agri-food supply chain, having worked in it there. And so wanted to get into agri-food tech VC. And this is probably 6 years ago now, or maybe a bit longer. But there weren't really any around in the UK. Some big ones in Europe, but nothing in the UK. So I just started consulting again, sort of on the sort of corporate finance side, raising capital, getting companies investment ready, working inside company and sales teams, and in operations in some of them as well, and sort of all in the agricultural sector. And then this led me to joining Regenerate 4 years ago. And I initially started in the ventures team, as you mentioned. It's been a bit of a journey through. Started in the ventures team where we got an early stage EIS ag tech fund, which focused on UK new innovative technologies, deep tech predominantly, that's helping the transition to sustainable farming practices. And in that is just everything from biologicals, robotics, satellite imagery and sensing, sort of a whole variety of companies within there. And then in the midst of that, we then moved on to the private equity fundraising side, and now back in ventures and now head of ventures, so driving that forward. So sort of early stage investment and fundraising is really where I'm at. But let me tell you a bit more about Regenerate Asset Management and what we do within that.
Please,
So
because
we've
the
got
structure is, as you said, now there's the PE part, from what I understand, is there is the early stage, but I don't know if it's a pivot or an evolution where some of the investments are also led or
used on or
influenced
trialed.
by the PE part because you're feeding assets. If there's a new innovation, it can fit in one of your,
Yeah,
you even have like 60,000 hectares of farm yourself, I
yeah,
believe.
yeah.
So there's some of those
There's
connections. So tell us more about this.
Yeah, so there's three companies under the Regenerate umbrella. We've got the ventures fund, which I've just mentioned, which is the early stage, and that's purely technology.
Hmm.
We then have our sort of private equity fund, which we're sort of moving over to call a real asset fund, as it were, where we've raised 150 million euros, and that's to buy farms across Europe. And what we do there is to sort of private equity sort of buy and build, aggregate sort of value add model there, where we buy farms,
Right.
transition to regenerative in high value crops. So we've got blueberry farms in Portugal, cherry and pistachio farms in Spain, and then cow dairy farms in Denmark. And then we're looking to add a few more that are in the pipeline as well. And so that's sort of the farms that we own. And then we have our outcomes business, which is our sister business called Regenerate Outcomes, which is purely a UK project development business where we help UK farmers transition to regenerative practices. We educate them on how to do that, and we also baseline them for their carbon. And we are the first Vera validated farming company or project development in the UK that does arable and livestock. And so we're creating validated carbon credits for the farmers in that network. And
Gotcha.
that's where we've got 65,000 hectares under management with 150 farms.
Right.
So we have this unique ecosystem within Regenerate, within our own company of tech, farms and farmers. And where that leaves us on the sort of the venture side is that we get to see firsthand where there are gaps in technology that we need that could be enabling our transition more smoothly or helping our farmers transition more smoothly. So, and we get to test and trial technologies potentially before we even invest in them on our own farms, which gives a very unique view when you're having conversations with startups. What I've been amazed by is actually the conversations you have as an investor from a VC fund compared to being a potential customer on an operations side. And it gives you a much broader view, and they're much more open, as you probably expect, when they're speaking to clients about it. So yeah, we
Right.
can really see where the gaps in the market are, and also provide the route to market ourselves.
Very interesting. In a way, you're investing and you're thinking, hey, are you going to make revenues? Well, yeah, we have the customers. We are the customers. So
Yeah,
that's very interesting. I think there's one thing that really is recurring in this podcast, and I'll never repeat it enough, is the push there is in the VC industry right now, especially in boutique VC or in specialized VC, to have a real grasp of what's happening in their industry.
yeah,
Here it's farming, but it can be literally anything else. So on the farming side, we had very briefly on one of the episodes with Vivek of the Defossilization Development Fund, who is also a partner with Ceres AgTech.
yeah,
You might know them. Yeah.
yeah.
Would love to do the intro if you don't have it yet. But yeah, we had a very brief talk about AgTech. So very glad we can tackle this topic in today's episode. Before we do so, let's talk a little bit about your background. So the first part of the podcast is usually a bit more about yourself, and then we'll talk about maybe other topics. And we will have our typical, classic, dynamic segment, the this, that, yes, no, where it's going to be fast-paced questions, fast-paced answers, and then we have a couple of minutes to develop. And at the end, if we have time to tackle something we didn't have the time to tackle in the first part or second part, we'll do that then. So, without further ado, I would love to hear, and I think our audience as well, the big differences between PE and VC. But not only that, what makes a company succeed? Because when you get to the PE stage, it means that, well, you've been able to do a lot of other things before in the early stage. So, what do you observe in some of the PE deals or some of the growth stage companies that companies have to do in their early stage? When you see an early stage company, having had that experience in the later stage, what are the things you're looking for that maybe not every early stage company or every early stage VC even sees? Like, what is primordial to prepare for the scale, to prepare for that growth?
Yeah, and I think it's just worth noting that it's a bit different in our case because one's technology and one's real asset. So there's a difference
Right.
between like a growth stage, a venture tech deal and then a growth tech deal. They've got different parameters to then actually just buying the land assets themselves. But what I would say
Gotcha.
is from what I've seen from other companies is having, and you see this quite a lot, is that once you get past Series A, Series B, is having the right team and knowledge that has gone through that growth stage, that and the teams look a little bit different, and you see a restructure at that point of, well, let's say if you start from proof of concept stage, if you've got spin out from universities, you've got academics running it, they tend to be the CEOs and the sort of driving it forward. Then you bring in maybe a more commercial CEO, and then you need to bring in, and then the founder then drops back to maybe being a CTO or a CSO on that front, and then it's bringing in the expertise of sales, the CEO that's maybe got commercial background in the sector that you're in. For example, in one of our portfolio companies, SugarOx, is that the CEO, the founder, Dr. Cara Griffiths, is the CTO, and they brought in the CEO, Mark Robbins, who has commercialized ag biological companies and ag chem companies in the past. And so it's that experience of knowing the next stage of pathway and how to navigate that and how to do the trial, how to execute the trials, get the data that you need, pull in the investment that you need, and then going after the commercial partners to scale. So that I think
Is this
is,
something that you need to inquire on in the very early stage at even pre-seed, just making sure that when you meet a team of founders, a founder can take a company from 0 to 1. Some can take it from 1 to 10. Some can take it from 10 to 100. Rare are those who can do everything, including the steps that you
yeah.
just said. So is this something that you actually ask early on? Hey, are you aware that at some point you might not be the one calling all the shots? And is that something that have maybe even prevented you from doing some deals because you thought they have a good idea, they have a good team for today, but I don't think like I think that at some point they might block the growth of the company because the founder takes a too prominent space. I know it's more of a personal, it is very personal question, but is that something that you have to ask early on, or is it something you just see as it goes and you induce in the founder's vision later?
I think it's very circumstantial to the founders themselves, whether they've spun out from a university. You're seeing quite a lot in the ag tech sector that are coming from venture builders. And I think you need
Right.
to see how the team works together, because typical venture builders is that they sort of get pushed together in 3 month period, find a product fit or find a market fit and build a product for that. So it very dependent on it. And then I think you've got to see how the course runs. I think if you're venture building, it's this recruitment issue and C-suite issue. And actually
Mhm.
what we're going to be doing going forward is asking this, but it's not asking the question up front, it's making the founders aware up front so that they know
Mhm.
that it's one, it might be coming, but obviously, if they're doing a great job, we're not just going to rip out a founder
Oust
to
them,
do
of
that.
course.
But to make them aware of that, this is what will be needed in the long run. And I think it's just raising the awareness that it's a conversation that we will have to have. And so it's one of those things that you want to be super supportive of the founders in the very beginning. You don't want to sort of spook them and say, that they're on tenterhooks the whole time, being like, "Am I doing a good enough job?" Because you don't want to do that. You want to foster a good relationship. But I think it's just to bring the awareness is that this is what's going to happen. And I think that conversation doesn't happen uh, early enough or enough when going through this process. I think it's hard to do at due diligence stage. I think once it's the quite chicken and egg thing. I think when you're going through due diligence just to raise this before you've even done the deal. But I think
Mhm.
it's a conversation that needs to be had at the earlier stage once you've got that deal done about what the life cycle of the company looks like or the stages of the company looks like.
The raising awareness part is very important. I think that often I ask VCs, do you think that most founders understand exactly what you do and what you want? The answer ends up being no. And I think there's a lot of raising awareness on how the startup ecosystem works, including investments. That's what I just introduced, but also what you just said. A startup is not only, hey, we're going to build a cool team and grow and raise a couple of millions. There's the rounds after. It's what comes when you're starting to consider renewing the staff with what you said, considering maybe an exit. And those are things that a lot of founders think is going to be in 5 years. We'll have time to think about it. So interesting that there's a right balance to be found between imposing it, which shouldn't be done because it can get scary, and just raising awareness. You mentioned venture building. We mentioned VC, we mentioned P, we mentioned a couple of different financial vehicles. And I remember in the little update catch-up call we had before this podcast, you mentioned that some deals are not right for VC. VC is not always the right tool.
Yeah.
And we talked a lot about the right vehicles. And I'd like to have your vision, starting with regenerative agriculture. Is every company in regenerative agriculture, hardware or software, good to go to VC? Or is it not? And if not, what are the other vehicles available? And is that something that you also advise if you have people coming your way? You have this project, you say, well, we might not be the right ones, but you should go to this kind of funding.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to be helpful if we can't do the deal ourselves, is to say what one other investors that I know in the sector that fit their mandate as well, or fit the strategy for what the company's trying to achieve, but also have they thought about the different options? Like, is there venture debt? And I think it very much depends on like how quickly they can generate revenue. And I think in some ag tech companies is that they can be revenue generating year one, year two. And so can you
Mhm.
push through that? And then is it worth taking a little bit of or on that front to scale in that way. Or I mean, what we're seeing a bit more on the venture side and where we're sitting a bit more hardware, because we're sort of very much inside the farm gate on the operations side, is that I think what we're seeing today is ag tech funds or focused funds or agri-food supply chain focused funds. A lot of the money is going into what could be done by infrastructure funds. A lot of it is the hardware capex side, where
Right.
actually, and if they look at their sort of route to market in terms of, I mean, we've got a company that was looking at this that was trying to head to a certain amount of hectares or service a certain amount of hectares, and then we were looking at in a different way, is that rather than trying to fit 1,500 hectares, if you were to do a smaller pilot plant of just 500 and then replicating that, so you get your technology up to be able to do 500 hectares, which is I would say it's easier, but it's probably more manageable and less, engineering issues
Sure.
on a robotic side. And then can you replicate that and then do that through debt financing? And as the ROI within 2 years of the debt financing of that company, rather than going for a 5-10 million raise, trying to hit that 1,500 hectares, it being tricky. You get to your next stage and you maybe haven't hit your milestones, that the robotics isn't quite there. And then you can't find that next funding round because you haven't hit that milestone. You can't find that next investor. And so I think it's just, are there a couple of different ways of going about funding? And or are there new Innovate UK grant? I mean, we're in the UK, so UK grant funding that might be able to do this, or that you want to
Right.
work on a next bit of your project that can be done through a grant funding piece that maybe doesn't have to be done through a funding round. So it varies on what the technology is, to whether you need the technical team or employ an extra technical person to execute that, or can you get a grant funding to maybe just work on that on the side and then bring it in? And so
Sometimes not being afraid of doing too little, but just taking smaller increments to prove traction, to prove that you're still going at a reasonable pace. And it's not because you're not going from 1 to 100 that it's a failure. You have to do the 1 to 10 and then 10 to 50 and 50 to 100.
yeah, and I think that's also a reflection of the UK European VC market as well. Is that we're
Right.
sort of slightly beholden to our LPs, to the VC funds, to how we handle or invest with the founders. Is that if you look at the US, is that they can raise pre-seed money at 10 million, and their
Yeah.
investors sort of go, here's 10 million. I don't want to see you until you've got your product ready and it's ready to go. Where
Gotcha.
I think we aren't
A bit
great at
more
this in
averse.
UK Europe, where we're a bit more drip feed. Is 250k. Here's another 250k, and so I mean I'd love to get to the point where we could just sort of. But you've got to have good belief in your founder and the technology and product market fit for you to be able to do that. So I mean, I understand why our markets do, or like the UK European markets do work in that sort of incremental stage, but it is also quite difficult because what I also find is, like, with a lot of the founders that are that are sort of the CEOs, but the technical team, or have founded the technology themselves, spend most of their time out fundraising for the first 4 years, from their
Yeah.
pre-seed to seed
It's a
to
full-time
Series
job.
A. It's a full-time job, and they're not focusing on the technology. So there's a sort of, like, we're asking from the VC side, saying, can you hit these milestones? They're saying, I'm trying, but I've also got to go and raise at the same
We need
time. And
money.
so we need money. We need money. And so if there was more money flowing into this sector, we could give the money. They could then go away and work on it, rather than this continuously need for fundraising.
And what would be your advice in that sense? Because, well, okay, that's a problem we're stating, but what was the rule of thumb? Because we've opened many topics, say, well, the amount of the type of money you take and the type of increments you do depends on the money you get. Let's do the rule of thumb. Debt versus VC. You say it depends on the time to market. What was the rule of thumb here? If you have a route to market that is shorter, then you want to confirm those revenues first, and then maybe go with a mix of debt and equity,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
maybe grants as well.
yeah. But that's very much on the hardware side of things. If you're in a biologicals, or you're sort of in a sort of, it's not as easy as that, because you need to pay for clinical trials, or just trial in field to get the data to then be able to show that show that to the clients, and sort of to get commercial traction.
And then make
So
traction, right?
and then get traction that way, and because no one's going to do this without data and the efficacy of your product. So
So the rule of
that's
thumb is, if you can get to revenues with as little equity, try to do that way, because it's better and easier for everyone.
yeah. I mean, I'd probably know 2-3 ag tech companies. I mean, it's not a huge amount, but they've never raised at all.
Gotcha.
And they've just grown. I wouldn't say slowly. I think they've done a good job of it, but they've just been really sure about their cut, sort of, yeah, their revenue just coming in bit by bit by bit. So it is doable, but that's also a bit more of a, I mean, that's a sort of a bit more of a SaaS platform with a
Gotcha.
machine that's, yeah. So it's very nuanced, and I think this is also a common misconception of ag tech. They're like, oh, it's such a niche sector, or the agri-food supply
Mhm.
chain. It's quite niche. But if you look at how many sectors are within agriculture, everything from, hardware, robotics, your biological satellite imagery and sensing, software as a service, that there's it's a broad church of different technologies within one sector, and to have a good deep knowledge across all of them is, that's why
But
I'd say it's not one size fits all with what we're doing.
it opens an opportunity for other types of fund. You also mentioned, I think that's a big learning here, is that a lot of things that go through agtech funds could be covered by, for example, infrastructure funds, infratech.
Yeah.
If they're doing software, it can be covered by a software fund, just an AI fund. So maybe one of the worst founders out there, and anyone listening who has a technology, even if you're within an industry, what you're doing doesn't mean that, hey, you just got to get the funding from the VC of that industry. It
Yeah.
can be a lot more than this. So you just have to be more resourceful. And I guess in Europe, in terms of being resourceful, you also have to adapt to the types of funding. If the funding comes in tranche, then adapt your progress to those tranches. Don't go and make a 10 million factory or create a plan that drives toward a 10 million factory if you know that the funding is going to come in 1 million, then 5, and then 10. Start with a
Yeah.
1 million factory, and that's going to make more sense.
And that's going to make
The
more
other
sense.
reason,
And I think,
yeah,
yeah, and so and coming back to your point about being an infra, is that in the UK, they just had a mandate from the government, is that food security, defense and food are number one security issues as of the last 3 months. And so
right.
there's now a lot of, from UK grant funding, but also from research centers, is that they're combining defense sort of, early stage
Mhm.
innovation and agricultural innovation, because there is crossover if you're looking at the satellite sort of imagery side of
Absolutely.
things, that
Imagery.
there's that, yeah, and the AI side is that you can have teams that can hybrid across both, and so trying to join the two sort of sectors together, they might not look like they work together, but actually there is a lot of crossover in terms of potential teams in there. But then, like you're saying, from the funding side as well, it can make sense too.
We will continue the discussion about different financial planning or say fundraising planning, different vehicles a bit after. I think this is the direction we're going to take for the part three of the podcast. One of the main reason I remember you told me about one company that I think it was pesticides and they weren't really going well. So you bought back the IP, but it's not really a VC backable thing. Hence the introduction of potential debt funding. We'll talk about this later. And also the fact that because your investments are now being correlated to the PE assets, there's a bit of it's kind of looking like a strategic CVC, or you sometimes even spin in or spin out businesses within Regenerate. So that'll be very interesting for part three. Now, let's go for part two, which is the part that I usually define as the sushi restaurant, where you go and you just have to trust the chef. It's not you getting the asking the questions, or setting the theme, but I'm sure you're gonna do amazing. The format, if you haven't heard it yet, it is the this or that, very classic, 1 minute, 10 or so questions, sometimes a bit more, rapid fire, rapid answer, and then don't worry if you answered something and you feel like you wanted to answer something else. We have a bit of time to discuss that, and then we'll do the same with yes or no. Are you ready? All right, so let's go. Farm visit or pitch deck?
Pitch deck,
P or VC, which one do you prefer? I think this one is obvious.
VC.
If you have a founder that has previous founder experience, is it an advantage or is it a potential to have a blind spot because you're thinking, oh, they already have the experience and you forget to check that?
No, I think it's a positive, because there's something there that they've been through it, and so, but then it's up to you to work with them through the next iteration of what this technology is. But I think it's definitely useful to, it's definitely
Gotcha.
humbling if they're a previous, or sort of, they understand the trials and tribulations of being a founder.
I see. What matters more, the quality of the upstream innovation or the potential of the downstream adoption?
Upstream innovation and the fit for it.
Pre-seed, seed, or Series A, which one do you prefer doing as an investor?
Seed.
Do you prefer being in your office or do you enjoy a good field trip to the farm or to the lab?
I like a field trip.
Is this where you learn the most, you'd say?
It's where you learn the most. There's only so much you can do from the desk and from reading decks and speaking on the phone. To actually go and see it in person is where you really get an understanding of it.
We have a battle of plants versus animal. What do you prefer between livestock tech or crop tech?
I quite like livestock tech, but I probably, but predominantly most of the stuff
Okay.
I've done is in fresh produce and horticulture. But I'm fascinated by animal welfare, and but there's a new wave of like sort of I'm quite interested in cow tech, specifically. So I think that's quite. It's not new, but there's a lot more of it coming through these days.
For Regenerate, what comes first, the impact metrics or the financial returns?
Financial returns, because the impact metric it'll be a given. It's an underlying point for us.
And now, do you consider yourself to be an independent VC, or are you leaning towards being a corporate VC?
Well, I mean, you could probably say that we're corporate just because of our structure. But no, I would say, I mean, it's not like we've got corporate investment coming in behind us. Yeah, I mean, we're in discussions about it, but we're sort of we're an independent VC, but we've got a sort of corporate view on it. I would say, maybe, if that makes sense, of a CVC kind of thing.
All right, perfect. That was it for the first part. You can take a bit of a breath. Okay. We had upstream innovation and downstream adoption. You said upstream innovation. I was actually thinking you would say downstream adoption, because if the innovation doesn't see adoption, the innovation isn't worth it. So can you tell us a bit more about your decision in the quality of the innovation versus the potential of the adoption?
Yeah, I think that this is also where we sit in a unique place, is that because we own our own farms and we sort of, in some cases, are the downstream adoption of it. That's why the upstream innovation is interesting for us, because we already know that viewpoint of the adoption side. So we know what we're looking for. So that's where we can go and look for the upstream innovation and pinpoint what we want. But that's very different to a traditional VC, because they don't always have this real asset side and they're like the deep sector knowledge of on-farm need.
So it's because of your knowledge of the downstream.
It's because of our knowledge of the downstream.
Your actual gap is upstream. Gotcha. And then we had pre-seed, seed, or Series A, and you said seed right in the middle. Why seed and why not pre-seed and why not Series A? You do all, I'm sure you like all, but why the specific focus on seed?
I think seed is that there's a product that's pretty much, I mean, it's not fully ready to go, but let's say if you've identified the technology you need, you've done the background research on the market fit, and you should know what your route to market is and who your customers will be. So that's where you're sitting in a pretty good place to make that next stage. I think pre-seed, it's still quite up. You might not have a product ready to go. You're still trying to test the market on it. It's a bit risky. More difficult it's more risky. And then at this Series A, I mean, I think obviously if you've got all the fit of everything you have in the seed that I just mentioned, you just need the capital to get over the Series A mark to finalize, get your technology 100% ready to get to route to market. It's a bit more different, the Series A plus, but that's a scaling part, and I quite like. My favorite bit is finding the innovation, finding the product market fit, making sure that there is a gap in the market there, and then helping the companies through that stage. We like to be a hands-on VC. So I think it also depends on what kind of VC you are, and I think that's going back to your earlier point about questions and raising points. It's like, what kind of VC do you want to be, and what kind of VC do your founders want to have on their cap table? Do they want just passive money, or do they want someone that's got deep sector knowledge or wants to be active and help on the board and X, Y, Z? So
I see. And the final question was impact metric or financial return. I'm glad you said financial return, because I think a lot of different funds will answer this question differently. But all in all, it feels like it all comes out to one same thing. If the finances work and your project is intrinsically with an impact potential, if the financial work is because you're scaling, and if you're scaling a solution that has an impact, you will have the impact metric following. But I'm glad that you're keeping inside the financial part and that you're being honest. I think I've heard in my times, and maybe it's because maybe impact funds were a bit less mature and they thought impact is going to be everything. We're just looking at the impact. Then invest in a bunch of companies because the impact looked so good, but the finances weren't straight. And by losing the finances, they just lost their entire funding because they need to make returns. So thanks for answering finances on this one. And tell me if I'm wrong, but I guess that's what you meant. If the finances are going well, the impact should follow because the innovation upstream has been checked to have that impact, correctly?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, everything we fundamentally do is regenerative and sustainable. So we wouldn't be looking at a deal that
Hmm.
doesn't really that is it's just a prerequisite for us. So
Gotcha.
that's where the returns are are what drives it. And like you was like saying, it's like if you don't if your financial models and your returns, if your revenue streams aren't stable, there isn't going to be a company. So there won't be any impact metrics. Or there won't be any impact data to come out of it because it might not last the course. So
Hmm.
you've got to have a financially sound company to then be making impact.
I see. We're gonna move to part two of the part two, 2.2. It's a lot of twos. Is a yes or no. So if you're ready, same format. Now you're well versed into it. So let's go. Is a VC-backed pesticide company ever a good idea?
Yeah, no, it is that, yes, it is.
Good.
We can go into a conversation about it later.
We will. Should more agri-food investors spend time on farms before writing checks?
Agri-tech investors should do. This is a whole separate conversation about agri-food, and they probably shouldn't be joined together.
I should have said agri-tech. My bad. Is regenerative agriculture generally fundable at pre-seed and seed in 2026?
Yes, there are companies that are doing it. I think there's just to make a quick different or sort of statement about it. Regenerative farming is driven by management practice change that is underpinned or supported by technology. It's not that a piece of technology is the silver bullet to regenerative farming. So it's a support system of a management practice change. But but there are companies that are investable 100% in 2026.
Gotcha. Is the ESG label now more of a burden or a badge for founders?
I think it can be a bit of a burden, actually. And I remember one of our portfolio companies, maybe we get onto this, but saying that they've got to deliver ESG targets as well as delivering financial return because that's what their investors are looking for, where just any other
Right.
company is just trying to deliver financial return. So it's this extra level of stress reporting need for data that also costs money, which also then needs to raise capital for that. That can be a
Right.
burden on the companies.
And do you think it's also more of a burden than a badge for investors as well?
Not at VC, at PE, I think it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Being Article 8, Article 9, I think is especially Article 9 and TNFD reporting.
Do you think there's a fundamental conflict between the VC return timelines and regenerative agriculture outcomes?
Yes, I think so. I think it's not just in regenerative farming or ag tech as a whole, it's in climate tech. Life cycles can be longer, especially in agriculture, because if you miss a season, or you have bad weather or whatever it might be, you have to wait another 12 months potentially to be able to try technology again.
Would you ever go back to operating a company rather than investing?
I would, but not in the not in technology. It would probably be in the restaurant or food industry if I was
Okay.
gonna do it.
Do most founders in your sector actually understand what VC capital is designed for?
Pro- I'd probably say no, but I think that's maybe something we've got to break about what VC capital should be used for and what it was historically used for and what it's used for now. So I think for founders, as I completely understand, is just money is money. But I think what comes with VC capital is understanding and assistance and help and knowledge.
Another final question. Are you having a good time on the show?
Oh, having a great time. This is one of the most interactive,
Beautiful.
fun podcasts I've been on.
Great. All right. So a lot of questions where there was a lot of explanation and a lot of nuance, which is what it's made for. I mean, I purposely try to have yes or no as the only possible
So,
outcomes
so
to
sorry.
push for a kind of Manichaean view, and then of course we bring in the detail to it. Let's see in there what was the first one we had. Yeah, VC-backed pesticide company is ever a good idea. You said yes. I had the word pesticide because it's very strong, and when people hear pesticide, they think, well, it's not regenerative. You're kidding. So maybe tell us a bit more about not just pesticides, but the vision of regenerative farming. What is regenerative farming? Because we've been talking about this whole thing
Yeah.
for the whole podcast. Now, let's take a bit of time to define this. What is regenerative and what isn't regenerative? And how is a pesticide that's killing regenerative?
So I think that regenerative and how we would describe this, everything is underpinned by soil health and improving
Right.
the soil, and soil microbiome and sort of the nutrients within the soil itself. And so this is why I was coming back to it being management practice change is that we follow the lines of sort of understanding Ag's 6 principles, which is to give a few, is like cover cropping, livestock integration, soil covering at all times. Oh gosh, now you're going to put me on the spot remembering them all. One of them's context and reduction of chemical usage. And so those are all management practice changes. And the aim for that, and predominantly, as we see in our agricultural sector, is to move away from chemical inputs and then adding in these also synthetic inputs, as it were, and then adding the management practice change in. But you can't, it's a transition because you need to build your soil health, because if you've been feeding it fertilizer and all these inputs, sort of, it's like, this maybe quite an aggressive analogy on this, but if you had a heroin addict and you suddenly took it away one day and the next day and you asked them to go and run, it'd be pretty hard. And it's the same with soil that's had NPK inputs. You can't just take it away. It's a transition process to build
There's
up
momentum to it.
So like, you just build up the soil microbiology and get it going and breathe life back into it again. And so coming to a point about pesticides, I think they can be called pesticides, but they're sort of the alternatives. Like, we would just call them biopesticides, or anything that's just tackling insects or pest control, as it were. And so you can have everything from the biologicals that you can spray on. That, I mean, there's loads of different ones out there. You can use CRISPR genetics to make the plants more resilient. You can spray on molecules that make repel pests. We have a company that was sterilizing fruit flies, but could sterilize any insects that was capable of doing that. You've got pheromone technologies. And so there are lots of pesticides, are sort of the broad spectrum of the sector of it. But there's lots of different technologies within it that can be seen as more sustainable and regenerative, as for want of a better word, that are better for the environment, better for the plants and the soil health.
How do you tackle the ethics behind this? Because I'm not going to say it's directly a hubris because you're kind of playing God and manipulating nature, but as a fund, how do you play with nature with a big N and financial returns and you have this regenerative part? Like, who are we or who are you as a fund to define, hey, this is what I think is regenerative? There's a bit of a fine line. Now we come to the ethical question. How do you articulate that?
Yeah, so I think we think about this quite a lot in terms of when we're making investments or looking at technologies, is that there's a lot going on in the world in GM, whether that's in insects or crops, or whether it's genetic editing within them as well. And I think we like to look at it is that it's not just the first stage of this, is that we try and look, 10, 15, 20 years down the future. If you were using this technology, what are the outcomes of the outcomes of that, of the outcomes of that? And if you're going to hit a brick wall that's going to be affecting nature or manipulating it, would we do that? And we aim or hope to that we don't do that. So, for example, with the fruit flies and the sterilizing of them, you collect fruit flies on an annual basis at local level. You sterilize the males, you release them into the wild, and it was having sort of 97% success rate 91% of suppression of fruit flies in that season. But then you start again the next season. So it's not like you're completely eradicating or taking an insect out, albeit maybe a pest. There are technologies that will then, if you're doing gene editing or gene modification, that there will be a point in time when there aren't any of those insects. And there's a reason in the general nature as a whole why they are there. And so we always try to
part of it.
They need it, and they have done for a very long time. So we tried to see what the future looks like if you carried on to using this technology. I mean, I've seen some pretty crazy stuff in terms of sex semen of cows only producing heifers. And so if you go down that route, if you're just producing female cows after female cows after female cows, how does that then skew nature? As humans, we do populations and the knock-on effect of the breeding, and how this knock-on effect happens. And, it might look great for 10 years, but, 20, 30 years down the line, what does that look like? And how does that have a knock-on effect? And then on our food systems, for future generations. So we're very conscious about looking all the way down sort of to the end of the path and see what that looks like.
Right. I asked you about whether founders knew what VCs wanted or what they were aiming for, what the capital should be aimed at. So this is where we will loop back to the first part of the podcast where we were talking about different types of investment for different targets. And you answered no. And we're going back to maybe raising awareness, which is what this podcast is about in a way. Let's talk about this a little bit. Different money going in different places. You said that some founders don't really know what VC money should go, where it should go, and what VCs expect from them. So can you develop a bit more here and on that idea that you mentioned earlier, the famous pesticide company that you bought back the IP, but should be scaled with debt? let's start with this as an example, actually. Why is this company specifically not VC backable, but should be funded with debt? Is it again to do with the cycle to sales? Anything else?
I, I think that's also quite nuanced in a way as well, because there's a lot of VC money that was needed to get this technology like at a sort of product ready.
Stage.
So that it's the stage specific, I think. So it did need VC money for the innovation, to get to the innovation side of it, and then we
Okay.
hit a point where it could be infra from there on out, not VC, if that makes sense.
So at some point, VC can be the right. So it's not just a company is not VC backable. It can be that you're VC backable for a stage to another one, but the later one shouldn't.
Yeah.
Do you also have instances where the inverse applies, where at the start you shouldn't take the VC, but you should take it later?
I think it's sort of, I think it depends on how you, again, what sector and how you want to scale. I mean, I've seen some other companies that don't want VC money at all. And I think also it's been to the detriment to having some companies have VC money, because they're driving milestones, driving the returns, and want to see an uptick in valuation, where if you've got
Right.
friends and family, it depends on your networks and how well you know people that are happy
Mm-hmm.
to not have this pressure of a fund life cycle as well. So
Right.
that's where some companies have scaled, had a good, like a big injection of VC capital, scaled because they've been told to, built huge sales teams, smaller tech teams, then fired the whole sales team, and then tried to build up the tech team because it wasn't. And then there's this quite vicious cycle where the VCs being like, you're not delivering on this, and you can deliver on this and deliver on this. But it's not always at the disposal of every founder to be able to have the
Right.
friends and family or the angel networks that might be able to be more patient and really understanding. And what I do see quite a lot of is that if you do find a good angel or angel network that understand your sector, then they really pick one company and they really nurture it, and they'll carry on doing the follow-on rounds until it hits that Series A.
Gotcha.
So it's not really answering your question, but again, it depends on what your technology needs and how quickly you need the capital and what you need it for in that early stage as well.
So what are the three things that you'd say make a technology VC needing? And so we'll take the flip of that and say that's where you don't need it.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I think when a VC needs to build IP and tech in-house to differentiate themselves, I think you do need VC backing.
So when a company needs to build in-house
When it
to get
builds in-house,
IP
when
differentiation.
it's like very like not knowledge intensive and technology intensive, I think
Okay.
that you do need, because you need the technical team to get the product into
And that's where
some
the
shape or
costs are
form.
induced.
Yeah. So that's where I think
Gotcha.
you do need it. Same same on pharmaceuticals and biological side of things as well. That's the same thing. It's the sort of getting the first, I have to say, let's say in biologicals, like the first molecule, or isolating out the first molecule that you know has efficacy and that works. And then you need the capital there to be able to scale that or build and make enough of that molecule to trial. And so that's also what some companies struggle with as well, is that they've identified the process of how to do it and the molecule, but then they need to, and sometimes it's not, they need just 20 kg of this, but that's just to go and field trial with it. But they're even struggling to get to that scaling of making 20 kg of a molecule. And so that's where I think VC money is.
So
That's like
it's a
we're
calculation
like,
of what you need and the timeline you have to do
and the
it.
timeline you have for it, and the need to like get it quickly to, yeah. It's also like how,
Right.
and you want to do it as quickly as, but it's obviously, I mean, everyone wants to do it as quickly as possible. Of course they do, but yeah, it's just sort of understanding. And I think really when you're putting your models together and being super realistic, I mean, there's nothing, and be realistic about what that looks like and what the team looks like, and also having an idea of what that team member looks like, rather than, I think I do see quite a lot, is that they get to the point like, oh, we need this person now, and then they go and spend a lot of time recruiting for that person, trying to bring them in. Sometimes they don't work out, and that also, I think a lot of it comes back to the recruitment side of knowing. It's like, obviously you've got like your time or your sort of your funding timeline of what you need, but I think also people probably neglect what your team timeline looks like. as well, and having a good understanding of at this point we need this person, and at this point, which then comes back into your point about who's the CEO and who's the CTO and where the founders come in, and I think if you can dual put your funding and your team timelines together, you should have a
So
better
which one
standing.
should come first? The team timeline should be the first thing that you build, and then the funding strategy. Is that what you're saying? Like the team strategy reflects, so the product needs reflect the team growth strategy,
Yeah.
and this is what should anchor a funding strategy. That's the order you should do it in.
I think so, but again, also you can we also see at the very early stage as well is that you're going down a route and then you hit you need to pivot, and so you might build a team for that, and actually that's not working out, and so you see a lot of pivoting at sort of pre-seed into seed,
Of
and
course.
also into Series A, and we've seen a lot of that recently as well because of the funding in the sector is very low, and so companies have been trying to keep the lights on by pivoting a bit to try and get into not a
Can
new
be
market,
faster
but
revenues.
faster revenues. But again, they didn't have the right technical team to be able to deliver that because they didn't have the right funding. So it's a sort of which one comes first. But I think if you've got an idea of both of them, but
Right.
having an idea of how to get that, what the product need, I think it comes a product fit as well, and that's also where you were asking about whether investors should go on farm. I think founders should go on farm. You'd be
Right.
surprised by how many founders
I've never been
have
on a farm.
not know or ask what the need is. And I think this is always my number one thing is like we look to invest in technologies that are number one or number two concern of farmers, that there's like every day someone told me it was like hair on fire, this is a problem, we need to sort it out. Where you do see quite a lot of companies that are starting that are great ideas, but might be number 10 on the list. And so it's not a priority. And so that's when the adoption
Right.
comes, is that, yeah, it's a nice to have, but it's not really affecting my bottom line, if
So
I got there in
constantly
the
ask the
future.
users
Yeah, and
and not
so
be
it
afraid of them saying, hey, that's what you're building is not our priority. And maybe that's a signal to pivot,
yeah.
at
Yeah,
least for
and
now.
so it's tricky, again, if it comes to that point, if we just
Right.
had, a couple of
Um,
million to go and give
I'm
them. But yeah.
I'm being conscious of your time, so we'll finish on a more personal note to you and Regenerate. What are the kind of profiles you're looking for at the moment? What are your current challenges? If there's anyone in our deal flow that we can pass along, or if anyone listening to the podcast believes, hey, we could actually be a right fit, what are the kind of things you're looking after at the moment? You mentioned cow tech, but apart from cows, is there anything else that really keeps you awake at night? That maybe one of your portfolio company needs to create a key partnership, one of your farm needs to unlock something in their development. What are those kind of things that would be really helpful, either in your deal flow or even investors? I know you're raising that PE fund.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're raising PE and VC as well. So always
Gotcha.
always open to a conversation on that front or if anyone.
Hmm.
I mean, normally it starts with investors. So obviously, if anyone would love to, I probably can't pitch too much on this front, but I'm always open to a conversation to discuss what we do and educate around the agricultural sector. I think what we're looking for in any blueberry harvesting that is anyone's got hand picking with robots, please let me know.
Okay.
We've heard of a few, but they haven't made it through in
You're
terms of.
handpicking the companies as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, robotics for harvesting is super
Okay.
interesting for us. What else is anything for water and reduction of water usage or efficiency is also super interesting. We've
So it
got a
could
lot of
be materials that are retaining the water. I know there's a company doing hydroponics, but they're using they vaporize the water. So instead of doing hydroponics in big
airponics. Yeah,
tanks, airponics, yeah, they just vaporize with very, very cheap ultrasonic
yeah.
speakers, and just put that in a box, and suddenly all the water is vaporized. Is that something that you've looked into? Cool
Yeah, I mean
project.
that's very much for a hydroponic setup that you've got to be in a closed
Gotcha.
environment. But what they would do, yeah, it's NASA technology if it's airponics that you would. Well, sorry, that's sort of that is very cool. And then what else are we looking for? And just
Biostimulants, maybe. There's a lot in
yeah,
seaweed. I
but
mean, I come
yeah,
from the seaweed industry, and there's a lot of people doing biostimulants in seaweed. If you want some introductions, very happy to do that because it seems like it's something that's struggling to take up pace. And we've seen companies, everyone, it feels like everyone in seaweed was doing biostimulants at some point, but the adoption isn't really there. This could be an entire other discussion, but is that something you're looking into as well?
I mean I've looked at quite a lot of the sort of the algae based. I think I'd be
Uh-huh.
interested in microalgae that are grown in tanks rather than the harvesting from the sea. There's just a whole operational side to get it to the point, and then and I think what I'm seeing is I'm not seeing the efficacy compared to biologicals. So
Okay.
molecules that are scaled up in either sort of found in labs and then scaled up in precision fermentation is just not quite seaweed biologicals are not quite hitting the same efficacy, but always open to
Right.
seeing more. Reduction of ammonia and methane emissions. The other one is methane, not methane, nitrogen leaching in the soil. There's nitrogen sensing for arable and how much nitrogen you should be putting on. But we'd love to find a
Okay.
sensor that you could put in permanent pasture where our dairy cows are grazing to see how much nitrogen is leaching through. But that is maybe a lot easier said than done.
Okay. I think because when those podcasts come out, we're going to make some advertising and stuff. I'll try to fit that in the LinkedIn post or something. If anyone is doing any of this, please check Addy's credentials. Of course, if you're listening to the podcast on Spotify, it will be in the description. On YouTube, it will be in the description. If you're seeing this through LinkedIn, it will be on the LinkedIn post. So, Addy, thank you so much for all of that. I don't know if you have any final words, any final words of wisdom or anything, any cool project you're working on at the moment, any cool farm you're going to visit.
I think I think I think it's just I think what I'd say to founders is really go and work out what the strategy of the VC is and make sure you're a fit for them, and also that they and also what you want out of them. And like talk about VC money, it's like what do you want out of your VC and can they be helpful and useful? Obviously money is money, which is great, but is there something additional on top of that? Am I going to
How
see
does the
any?
founder do that? How does the founder make sure? Because I've heard countless VCs say, "Hey, we could do this," but the actual number who actually deliver on this, how do you do? Do you just talk to some of their portfolio companies? But the portfolio companies don't want to trash their VCs if they're not doing anything. So, as a founder, how do you get that intel that a VC actually has something to give you and that it's
Yeah,
not
I
just
think
fluff?
it's like it's speaking to other founders and also speaking to other investors that might be able to tell you about it. It's a real networking game. So it's
Gotcha.
not that you can probably do a bit by desktop, but a lot of it's just networking.
Okay, don't be afraid of asking.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Exactly. Debbie. No.
Beautiful,
Always ask. Always ask.
beautiful. Addy, thank you so much. I think we're
Brilliant.
pretty much wraps up with everything I wanted to talk about. You told us what are your needs, what are your challenges, what you're seeing out there. I'd love to talk more about AgTech. I think in the end, that's one thing that everyone will be involved with is the soil. We all come from the same place. We will all end up in the same place in that soil, and everything we
And
eat comes from that soil.
yeah,
So very, very important topic, and I'm really glad we could get down to that right now. Thank you so much. And for our audience, everything you need is in the description, in the bio, everywhere. If you want to access the content, if you want to share it with anyone, follow the LinkedIn's, the Instagrams, the YouTube, all of that. Addy, maybe we'll hear you next time. Or if anyone has technology that is interesting for Regenerate, head to that direction. They are absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been really wonderful. We'll speak soon. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Bye bye.